going to be a whistle-stop tour of Henri Bergson's philosophy. I think if you're going to consider his idea of reducing the world, you have to really couch it in terms of his whole philosophy. So, yeah, bear with me if possible. And don't worry if you miss anything, because some of these ideas I see all the time. Right, so I'll try to show you why it's important for cognitive science as well, and also hopefully psychedelics. Here's a quick thumbnail sketch of Henri Bergson. He was born in 1859 in Paris. His father was Polish and his mother was a musician. Sorry, his mother was English. His father was a musician. He studied mathematics and philosophy and taught philosophy for several years before earning his doctorate. His thesis forming the material for his first book, Time and Free Will, in 1889. His recognition was really enhanced with his second book, Matter and Memory, and his popularity skyrocketed with the publication of Creative Evolution. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature for that book, and American psychologist William James a marvel and a true miracle in history of philosophy that marks the beginning of a new era. So that's kind of paraphrase it. His final book, The Two Sources of Morality and Religion, was published in 1932, before his death in 1941 at the age of 82. So, Bergson was primarily concerned with intuition, and like so many great Western ideas, intuition started with Plato. Here you've got his analogy of the divided line. It's meant to show you full models of the world, one pair for the visible and another for the intelligible. And if you follow the line upwards, you'll see it goes from imagination to belief, then reasoning, and finally intuition. And that is Noesis in Greek, or inner wisdom. So William James defined Noesis as a state of insight into truths unplumbed by the intellect, which, though inarticulate, carry a curious sense of authority. And that's really been an identifying feature of mystical experience since. And of course, today you have scientists like Dr. Carhart Harris and colleagues trying to induce noetic states in volunteers. And this is what's the source of the new resurgence of interest in Bergson's reducing valve, because the recent research showed that the reduced activity of the brain is correlative with the peak psychedelic state. So they're having the idea of like an unrestrained cognition in this sense. So staying with the idea of the noesis, this mode of knowing is often said to be inexpressible, which is not a great start for me, to be honest. But Aldous Huxley believed his own mescaline experience was an unspeakable yet self-evident paradox. So unspeakable that he went on to speak about it for the rest of his life. But Arthur Koestler hints at the same dilemma. His own experience was meaningful, though not in verbal terms, and in his own attempts to describe it, to express the inexpressible, one must somehow put it into words, and so one moves in a vicious circle. But what if the inability of these experiences a ruse, a sort of deceit of language that conceals something closer to home? Henri Bergson was convinced that this was indeed the case. He believed that we are intimately in touch with the noetic. He identified intuition as this direct mode of knowing. So, Bergson suggests that intuition continually unfolds in time. For example, when you're looking at an object, you're intuiting your position in relation to it. You don't have to reflect to make sure you aren't confusing your point of view with anyone else's. The perspective is yours, is implicit in the perceptual act. The objects opposing sides are occluded from sight, but you intuit their presence. You don't have to imagine these other sides because you implicitly know from past experience that they can be revealed by a reorientation of your posture. So living embodiment has this ongoing through time, suggests that the flow states we experience in sports, physical disciplines of any sort, creative arts and so on through time, are self which endures. So it's important here to note that Bergson doesn't mean the self that we represent to ourselves symbolically, since any representation we have, by definition, Bergson isn't the self, it's a static reflection on the self and encompasses its dynamic life. Instead, Bergson asks us to go deeper and dwell in a pre-reflective awareness, in the flux of consciousness, what he calls duration. The best way to think about duration is in terms of continuity. However, this continuity can't be represented spatially, because it's not a continuity made of separate parts that could be lined up alongside one another. Still, Bergson feels impelled to portray his intuition by using a spatial analogy of an elastic band being stretched. First, he says, contract the band to a mathematical point, which represents the now experience. Then, draw it out to make the line growing progressively longer. He wants us not to focus on the line, but on the action which traces it. If we can focus on the action of tracing, then we can see that the movement, which is duration, is not only continuous and differentiating, but also indivisible. Of course, we can always insert breaks into a spatial line to represent the motion, but the motion itself is indivisible. Again, symbols like this don't really do justice because they are spatial, but just bear with it if you can. To put it in terms of conscious experiences, let's say at this moment I'm feeling nervous. If examined closely, it's not the same as previous feelings of nervousness I've had, even if I use the same word. The feeling I have now is suffused with countless memories of previous experiences that come together to form the unique quality of this current feeling state. And whether or not I'm conscious of it, in the very next moment, the feeling will have morphed into something else. All of these new experiences then combine with a memory of the original feeling of nervousness that lingers like an overtone in my consciousness. Now, we can always look back and solidify this continuity once it's elapsed and divide it out into portions. But for Bergson, this is accomplished on the frozen memory of the continuity, on the stationary trace that the mobility of duration leaves behind, and not on the duration itself. So why do we always assume that these discrete states of consciousness succeed one another? William James likened the tendency to seizing a spinning top to catch its motion, while Bergson referred to our cinematographic perspective on life. Each thought, memory, and feeling is understood to exist separately within us, each taking up so much space within our psyche, each static snapshot lined up and unrolling on a homogeneous film of time. But as Bergson notes, envisioning the flow of consciousness as static and fragmented, or as snapshots on a roll of film, might suit the requirements of logic and language, but it is a spatialized understanding that deeply distorts an enduring consciousness whose qualities are continually converging to produce something new. Okay, my nephew may have messed up my slide. Okay, so let's treat this as everything that's not duration. In dealing with the external world via the intellect, we quantify things spatially all the time. Bergson's example of a block of sheep is perhaps easiest to grasp. When we look at the sheep, we notice they all look alike. There is a sameness to them, a homogeneity, but also we can count them because each sheep is spatially separated from or juxtaposed to the others. These two factors, sameness and separability, allow us to count them and represent them with a symbol, with a number, 7. We're all 7, yeah. In complete contrast, the duration of consciousness has qualitative differences, but they aren't juxtaposed. This is quite a difficult idea because it seems to suggest a paradox. Of course, the different qualities of consciousness are juxtaposable, you want to say. But what Bergson is trying to tell us is that this juxtaposition is only retrospective, only if we step outside of the stream of time and look back at it. Or if we stay in the stream and flow with it, consciousness can be seen for what it is, a succession of states, qualitatively different yet unextended, multiple yet unity. Mobile and continuously interpenetrating. So-called states literally melt into each other. So duration has big implications for free will. What it implies is that our actions aren't predetermined by previous states. There is no domino-like cause and effect going on. How can there be when you cannot separate successive states from one another spatially? Rather, the novelty of each succeeding state is its own origin. As Bergson puts it, consciousness retains the past, then rolls what time unrolls, and with it prepares a future which it'll itself help to create. It creates something new inside of itself, since voluntary action reacts on him who wills it, modifies in some degree the character of the person from whom it emanates, and accomplishes, by a kind of miracle, that creation of self by itself, which seems to be the very object of human life. And anyone familiar with Francisco Varela's idea of autopoiesis might see familiarity here. It's about a self-generating, self-specifying organism. So perhaps this vision of duration as mobility itself is what people experience in a psychedelic state. A good trip involves giving up static, discrete concepts, above all, our static sense of self. Turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream, sang the Beatles. But not everyone is immediately willing to give up that control, and it's almost as if Bergson anticipates the character of a bad trip back in 1911 when he says, before the spectacle of mobility, there may be some who are seized with dizziness. They think that all is movement, it has already ceased to exist. The material world, they say, is going to disintegrate, and the mind will drown in the torrent-like flow of things. In short, Bergson's advice is not to hold on, to let the stream carry you along. I'd say that's a great advice right now. Just let the concepts flow over you if possible. Okay, so much for the inner life. Bergson's intuition of duration is largely introspective in his first book, Time and Free Will. But keep reading him, like duration, his work refuses to stand still. Later, he says, reality is mobility itself. But note the phrasing. He doesn't say that reality is that which moves, or that reality is in constant motion, a phrasing that would imply that reality is a thing that has motion added to it. Instead, reality is, in and of itself, motion. This is a difficult idea, but Bergson insists that if we could live duration fully, we would recognize that there are changes, but underneath those changes, no things which change. As he did then for our internal states, Bergson is attempting to disabuse us of the idea that time is in any way spatially extended, or that its thrust is mechanistically predetermined by the past. The difference now, however, is that he is challenging not only the notion of separate states of mind, but the separation between mind and world. So philosophers have grappled with the problem of dualism ever since Descartes defined the conscious mind as a non-physical soul with a window into the world. When the idea of a soul was dropped, consciousness was said to be solely the product of brain function. But Bergson notes how a more pressing question then arises. How does a consciousness that is synonymous with a brain state ever gain access to the outside world? The standard view of cognitive science tries to sidestep the epistemological question by telling us that the world we experience is a model inside the head, reconstructed via sensory input to form a representation. This information processing view implies that the out there of conscious experience isn't really out there at all. It's inside the head. Our perceptions then are said to be a simulation of the real world. A simulation that is made by and exists within the brain. From this point of view, whenever you look at the sky you see is inside your head. Even stranger, this must mean that your skull is beyond the sky. Yet this idea doesn't seem to put off many cognitive scientists. Of course, we never feel our actual experience to be this way. When we look at the sky, we see it where it is, far above us. When we touch a table, the resistance is in the table. These are not experienced as states of mind or sensations in the head. They have an existence independent of their own. As Bergson writes, it's a mistake to think of matter as a thing able to produce in us perceptions. For common sense then, the world exists in itself, yet at the same time it's also pictorial as we perceive it. It is, in a word, an image, but a self-existing image. The image's existence is placed halfway between the thing and the representation. So if the brain is in the body, and the body is in the world, then the brain and the body are also images. Given this, he asks, how can one image, the brain, contain all other images? Obviously it can't. The idea that my perception of the world depends on an internal model with neural correlates rests on the assumption that the brain is isolated from the rest of the universe. But as a proper analysis of the brain in the back thought experiment shows, it's impossible for the brain and nervous system to live apart from the nourishing organism. We're talking about the need for a surrogate body, and not to mention a sustaining atmosphere for that body. Perceptions then vary with the movements of the brain, but they don't exist within them. Nothing is being super-added here. In fact, Bergson would say that any associated neural activity is reducing the image from being in itself to its being for me. In essence, the brain is a centre of delayed action, and the living body is casting a zone of indetermination around it, so that the images that surround the body reflect its possible action upon them. The brain and nervous system essentially carve out of a seamless flux only what's necessary in order to act, and these perceptions are these possible actions, albeit frozen in a virtual form. In fact, for Bergson, a living being's presence is equivalent to the suppression of all parts of an image in which its functions have no interest. Fundamentally, an image in and of itself interacts with everything. It partakes in a dynamic continuum, in which numberless vibrations all link together in uninterrupted continuity, travel in every direction like shivers through an immense body. And some of you might have a similarity to David Bohm's Holland movement. In this way then, the brain and nervous system are eliminative, not productive, Bergson's reducing valve. So, just recall for a moment how I described my experience of nervousness and how the continuity, the past continuously informed light stays the same throughout. Your perception of it isn't one continuous unchanging experience. In truth, it is a continuously changing experience. Its continuity is a multiplicity of changes, since in each moment is suffused by the memory of those previous to it. In the same way, says Bergson, our senses are mingled with 1,000 details of previous experience, only with the full reaction of various surroundings in memory. This recognition consists in a contraction of reality for practical purposes. Now, most scientists will tell you that memories are stored in the brain, but as Bergson points out, and this is true today as it was then, no one has yet isolated a memory in the brain. And the reason is very simple. In fact, it's consistent with the basic axiom that Bergson has held thus far. Because the intellect tends to turn processes into things, we think memories must be things. If the memory is a thing, then it must be in space. And if it's in space, it must be in the brain. But one of Bergson's most important ideas is that memory isn't stored anywhere. Memory is a relation in time, not space. According to Bergson, then, memory is always virtually present. It is just that our attention is held elsewhere. We imagine the brain to be a storehouse of memory only because we close ourselves to the fact that our entire past adheres to the present and constitutes a single uninterrupted change. There is one science that can deal with this idea, and it's the enactive school of cognitive science. It agrees that memory does not involve storage at all. According to enaction, the nexus of body, brain, and environment is a pattern in time, a continuously transforming, living memory of a biological, cultural, and personal history. And instances of consciousness remembering should be understood as the creation of the past in the imagination. To consciously remember them is to enact the past, or to orient the body in such a way that the reconstruction of the past can happen. The question is, can we ever experience a reality that is stripped of memory? Can we have a so-called pure perception? In theory, says Bergson, but unlikely in practice. Familiarity, the presence of the past, is just what allows us to act in order to bring about certain effects. If this constant call to action somehow falters, what happens when the familiar dissolves and the will suffers a profound change for the worse, as it did for Aldous Huxley one May morning in 1953. Huxley's world, for instance, becomes intrinsically meaningful, yet it's a transparent meaning. It embodies a pattern which has no specific destination in the future, but is simply its own point. In this sense, the present is uncaused, self-sufficient, and inherently creative. It is not aiming for anything, it's free. It is the source of our freedom. Of course, according to mainstream cognitive science, Huxley's vision has no intrinsic validity whatsoever. Cognitism views the mind or the brain as a computer, and a computer is a symbol manipulating machine. And what's a symbol? But something that stands for or represents something else. According to the computer model then, What has dissolved is simply Huxley's internal model of the world, which is a distortion that is no longer accurate. But from the point of view of the enactive school, the world is not a pre-specified external realm represented internally by the brain. This is an example of the myth that we're given. In line with Bergson's belief, the world is in fact a relational domain brought forth by our agency in history. We aren't parachuted into our environment, we enact it. We disclose a world that bears the stamp of our own structure. Huxley's loss of an objectified self in opposition to the world is then a change in his mode of coupling with the environment. The system as a whole has been perturbed to reveal us other aspects of an infinitely interpenetrated image. So to model this coupling, enactive cognition adopts a dynamic systems approach. It's a method of mathematics that adopts an abstract space to describe the behavior of complex dynamical systems. Instead of focusing on discrete states and treating changes that happen when a system shifts from one state to another, the cognitive model, dynamicists focus on how a system changes over time. Where computationalists think of cognitive structures as laid out statically, dynamicists see cognition as the flow of structures continuously interpenetrating each other. The similarities with Bergson's philosophy are clear. And just looking at the trajectory of this chaotic attractor, it's a Lorentz attractor, you might have the impression that it returns back to a given point, but actually it never exactly retraces its previous points. Even two trajectories starting off from nearby points diverge because chaotic systems are sensitive to initial conditions. Indeed, this starts to sound a lot like a visual representation of consciousness that Bergson would have espoused, a consciousness continuously renewed and continuously influenced by its past. To summarise then, lived time is continuously transforming itself into something new. It is differentiated, but by no means ranged through space. Remember, lived time retains the past, but is in no way determined by it. This freedom then is life itself, a creation seeming to lie not in some unthinkably remote past, but in an unfolding present. The brain and nervous system work to articulate the world via the presence of the past, following the divisions for our biological needs. But these are not absolute. With other needs, there would be other divisions. I'll just quickly go through this then. So here's the zinger for me, and we'll end here. If these divisions aren't essentially separate and static, if the self is time, and the objects are time, then there is no second external time that they are within. Bergson's assertion that there is only time, or only change, amounts to saying that there is no time, no change, there being no permanence as a counterpoint. Having used the time to deconstruct things, we can now complete Bergson's intuition and use the lack of a thing in time to negate time also. This paradox can be expressed in either of two contradictory ways. We may say that there is only the present. Not, of course, the present as usually understood, a series of fleeting moments which fall away to become the past, but a very different present that incorporates the past and the future because it always stays the same. So when Huxley claims to perceive eternal life in a flower, he isn't suggesting its infinite persistence in and through time. The flower is eternal because there is only one thing that doesn't change. It is always now. This then is duration in its noetic guise, only sometimes we need a molecular push to recognize it. If deep noetic states jumpstart our intuition, then perhaps psychedelics can facilitate cognitive science to discover what Henri Bergson often called the true empiricism. So thanks for sticking with me through that.